Hello, everyone. Welcome to Avaya's Overcoming PTSD curriculum. I'm Andy Anderson. My partner, Ike Allen, and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of Avaya University. Avaya is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teachers, Sue Marriott and Dr. Ann Kelly, are here to talk with us today about myths surrounding complex trauma, PTSD, and resilience. Sue and Ann are both psychotherapists in Austin, Texas, and together they co-host the top-rated awesome podcast and online community called Therapist Uncensored. They bring decades of training and experience as well as cutting-edge research about modern attachment and neuroscience to their clients and listeners. And together they share a mission for building security around the world one episode at a time. Therapist Uncensored now has almost 1 million downloads, and they are heard in 172 countries. And we have been honored to have Sue and Ann as featured teachers on many other Avaya events like Healing from Childhood Trauma, Breaking Free from Abandonment and Betrayal, Overcoming Narcissistic Abuse, and many more. So welcome back. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Andy. And by the way, we can update that. We are now well over 1 million downloads.
Yay! Awesome.
Thanks for having us on. Moment of cheer.
That's awesome. Well, I love it. So let's dive right into this topic. I love your title today. I think this is going to be a really great conversation for people. So given that the title of your talk is myths surrounding complex trauma, PTSD, and resilience, let's break those down. So let's start off with resilience. What are some myths around the topic of resilience?
Often I think people believe that someone is born with resilience. They're a more resilient child, or somebody, you speak about resilience as if somebody either has it and they don't. And resilience is actually something that is built, and it's built about our stress response system and how our body is taught and learns to respond to stress and to accommodate stress.
Yeah, and it's important related to PTSD because it basically sets up, as Anne's saying, the biology of when a stressor comes in, how the body's going to respond. So you can't really talk about trauma without also talking about going back to the basics of how this really literally all has to do with how the body responds to a stressful situation. And the gist of it is that it's learnable. It's still learnable no matter your age that you're listening, that we can we need a little bit of stress. Basically, the gist of it is you need a little bit of stress. You can't just have nothing and then be able to deal with stress. You actually need to be stressed and manage it in small increments to develop this kind of muscle. And so some parents do that naturally. Some parents or with some kids, there's too much stress that comes in at one time and it blows the system, or there's overprotection and there's not enough stress. So a lot of what we're going to be talking about today goes back to the biology of how we respond when something threatening happens.
Got it. Yeah, it reminds me of working out at the gym or whatever, doing a yoga class, right? We build up, we have to have some level of resistance in the muscles in order to build a muscle. So yeah, that's just what it made me think.
But if you try to lift too much, you're going to pull your back, you know what I mean, right? There's a range, you do nothing, you get flaccid. If you overdo it, you're going to hurt yourself. So,
and if you have it, chronically, right? If you're at the gym and you're constantly working and you don't have your muscles have time to relax, it really does mirror what can start to happen in trauma. And when we talk about trauma versus complex trauma, if you think about trauma being that you have that initial really tough event that stresses one's body, something happens, are we prepared to respond to it? Have we developed resilience to be able to take that and to deal with it? And then if you have the chronic kind of stresses where your body doesn't get to resolve itself, to recover. And if you have it from childhood where you have it chronically and your body doesn't get to relax and recover, your whole nervous system responds and prepares for that.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So, okay. So let's specifically talk about complex trauma. What is complex trauma versus something else?
Right. So we want to differentiate between trauma as in, we call them, big T traumas and little T traumas. So a big T trauma is you're in a fire or a major car accident, or, it's an event that you can see and point to that's unusual and unexpected, and that overflows your senses. That's
sexual assault.
Yeah, like a single sexual assault, like exactly sexual assault. So that's trauma. And then what we call little t trauma, it's this cumulative, like where you have multiple experiences. What people used to think is that related to complex trauma, so going back to the myths, is that it had to do with either lots and lots of small traumas or like like something very severe and extreme that causes complex trauma. But what the research is pointing to now is that's not necessarily the case. It's actually having these very early, again, biological, psychosocial systems, which is your early attachment relationships, have gone awry to begin with. And then later, so you already have your kind of an insecure system set up, like you have the wound kind of already, and then you have the stressor happen. And that's what causes complex trauma, which looks often like a lot of diagnoses, like anxiety disorder, depression, substance abuse,
dissociation,
you know what I mean? Like you begin to layer stuff on top of each other. And so then that's where the complex comes from. But it's not so much about the thing that happened. It's about what happened before the thing that happened. Right. So it really is about very early relationships.
And that's where resiliency is such an important topic related to this, because in a resilient relationship where you have these chronic episodes of something happening, if you can turn towards somebody to calm your body and build the belief that if something stressful happens and I can turn towards a safe other, then my body acclimates to that.
Right. And one of the problems when we have not had the right chemistry, and by chemistry we mean availability, like a caregiver that's available, responsive. Think of it like a triangle. So because part of what happens when we haven't had that is that it doesn't help. So yes, I can tell you about it, but I'm not going to feel any better because my body doesn't know how to use the relationship. So there's a reward part of it, so that in talking, I get the relief and I feel better, which makes me want to do it more.
And having the secure other to be able to bring that stress to.
That's right.
The body learns to acclimate and calm down. And then that develops a stress response system.
Right.
I have stress. It's predictable. It's something that I know I can control. Maybe it's not too much. And I can turn towards somebody else or myself to go, okay, I can handle this. And repetition really develops a nervous system that becomes resilient for that.
Right. But for a lot of folks with complex trauma, you don't have that.
Right.
And instead, the thought of turning to someone is aversive even, or it actually, for some of us, it doesn't even occur to us. We wouldn't think, because we haven't had that reward system, we'd have to think about it, but it wouldn't be the natural thing where I want to call someone. I would just I think people will relate to this. Something bad happens and you just move on, or you just deal with it. Like that's kind of on the, that's one of the attachment. That's one of the, it's not even attachment. It's the biology. It's one of the biological strategies is to numb, or another biological strategy is to attend and hang on and be vigilant. Both of these things are meant to protect us. And really what PTSD is about are exactly those same things that make up the attachment system. So let me say it a different way. The attachment system is basically the body's how our nervous system responds to stress. Without the right support that Anne's talking about, we will either, downregulate or upregulate, right? And then if we do that over time a lot, we end up having patterns where that we're either anxious, preoccupied, or dismissive, avoidant, or secure, or somewhere in between. So what PTSD looks like, some of the symptoms of PTSD is the hypervigilance, the nightmares, the flooding, which is this.
The irritability.
Right. Or the avoiding, numbing, you know what I mean? So we can layer the response to PTSD, the biology of that, right on top of attachment. But one is more state, and then one is like kind of more our traits. And that's something we actually talk quite a bit about on the podcast and in some of our educational materials, to be able to unpack that, because it's actually pretty, it's interesting, but it's nuanced a little bit.
Well, one of the things I want to add to that is like when we're talking about the neural networking, it's like you think of PTSD, what is that? It's a disorder. But really, PTSD is a reordering. It is a reordering of your nervous system in a way to respond to your environment. So depending on what the environment gives you, what you've had in your base, your nervous system reorders itself to stay in a prepared state, that and something that kept you safer when you were possibly younger is something you continue to do. And so if you can't bring your body to, if, like what Sue was saying, if you're not even thinking, I need to go to somebody else and get support because you've kind of been trained not to, you don't. But the important thing is, even if you think you're not feeling something, you think you're fine, your body really does keep it. It holds the stress inside, but you're not aware of it. And so it stays as a constant motor. And that's an easy way to maybe understand more of the hypervigilance or hyperarousal of PTSD.
Yeah, and I really like the way you're framing it up, which is that it's a solution. So these things that we're calling a disorder is actually a solution. It's our bodies are trying to keep us safe still. Maybe we should let her go on.
Yeah, that's a beautiful way of thinking about it, because I think so many people have such a judgment around, right, what their bodies have done and how their nervous systems have adapted to things that have happened to them in life. And yeah, like our bodies are these brilliant, beautiful, like creations, right, that can exactly, they're just trying to keep us alive and safe. That's, yeah.
Sometimes, unfortunately, the record sticks a little bit, you know?
Yeah. So, okay. So this is just like lingo and terminology for me, but you know, I hear a lot about CPTSD these days, right? PTSD, CPTSD. So is that what you mean when you're saying complex trauma? Is that okay?
Yeah. That's exactly right.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah. No, I was just curious. So what are like, I guess, what are some of the treatment implications for, you know, what you're talking about as it relates to complex trauma?
Well, one of the things we just finished talking about is how our body system is activated, and often people get upset at themselves and mad at themselves. And like a mistake can often be, let's go find the cause of that trauma, because that's what's causing this. And if we could go back, seek and find what caused that to begin with, and talk about it and get rid of it, then your body will quit responding that way. But in reality, as we talked about,
that's a myth.
That is a myth. That's a big myth. And as we've talked about it, and you can almost feel it as we do our bodies in response, and we're in this hypervigilant, we have to attend to the body first. We have to attend to the parts that our body says, this is survival, we need this, and our body's state in a prep state, prepared state for some trauma that could happen. And so one of the important parts of the treatment is to attend to the development of calming the body and building security in oneself first. So more about that.
Right. So a lot, you know, and as therapists, a lot of times people will come in and they want to deal with their, whatever it is, the abuse, which is normal and healthy, particularly the trauma. But in complex PTSD and in complex trauma, one of the things the research shows and what we've learned is that complex trauma is often, what we're saying is disorganized attachment with the trauma on top. So if we begin to go into the very painful trauma without first addressing, you know, our relationship, like basically getting some sort of foundation or secure sense of self and a secure sense of the world out there, then we can do this all day long. And it might can help, but what's a lot more effective actually is slowing down and working on the actual attachment disorder, or on the attachment disruptions or on the attachment injuries, rather than calling it disorder, because again, it's a solution. Mm-hmm. But so that we're building a sense of ourselves that we can see managing in the world. Building a relationship with the world is like able to support us, right? If we don't do that internal work, then again, sometimes we can make it worse by really diving into this stuff. And what's cool about this and what the research shows is that if you do really good attachment work first, you already are working on the trauma, because that's the original trauma. So that by the time that you get to, okay, now I want to work on this rape or whatever it is, it's much more accessible and immediate to be able to do even cognitive behavioral. Like there's lots of specific trauma things to do related to the trauma itself. But you know, the old phase-oriented, it's not old, but the phase-oriented approach when you have disorganized attachment. That's where we might call that a myth, that that's the only way to do it or the best way to do it. What we're saying is dealing with the disorganized attachment first is dealing with the trauma, and it's going to make the trauma work that you may need to do later a lot more effective.
That is fascinating. Yeah, I just think of, right, if we didn't get a great foundation as young people, yeah, we're not going to be able to respond to any kind of traumatic event, I'm guessing, right, as well, or be as resilient as if we did have that. So yes, going back to that foundation seems like, yeah, that's perfect. I love it. Is that kind of how it is?
Well, and it is, yes. And when we talk about going back, part of what that is not, again, only just reviewing childhood. It's going back is like really learning about your nervous system. And that's one thing we actually, this is one of our big motivations for developing a course that we've done. In fact, we title it, "It's Not Me, It's My Amygdala." And so you can see where that fits in this dialogue. And that is that one of the ways is to attend to the part of us that is hyperactive by learning, first of all, to de-shame. As Sue was mentioning, we have learned either to deactivate or to hyperactivate. And by learning to understand why you do that, that's half the battle of building security, because once you understand you're doing that, why your body is doing that, and really learn strategies for recognizing I've deactivated and how to take steps to come back towards the middle. We could talk all day long. It's just why we developed the course about what kind of steps you can do in order to learn to activate your body if you've deactivated, or to calm the hyperactivation. By working with these systems there, you're already developing and building a more secure system. So that's part of what we mean when we say going back. It's not even necessarily going back to review your childhood. It's dealing with today and how your child has impacted your body.
Yeah. And I love the title of your course, by the way. I think it totally does de-shame, and it, I don't know, it takes away, like, I don't know, someone's thought around, okay, well, there's something wrong with me. There's something I need to fix. And right, you're like giving people this greater understanding of this thing right up here, this amygdala, and what's going on up there and how it's influenced your life. So I love that. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But I guess one question, since like so much of your conversation is going back to attachment, going back to like feeling safe and secure. And I know I think I talk to you guys about this every time, but because it's such a huge thing, that feeling of security in so many ways. I guess a question I have is, like, how does PTSD affect people's relationships? Because obviously trust can be breached, all sorts of things. Like what's your thought on that? And I don't know, any insights into helping people navigate relationships based on having experienced some kind of trauma?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, do you mean adult like now? Or
Yeah.
Well, yeah, for sure. Like if you are partners with somebody who has had trauma, I think a lot of times working with sexual abuse survivors, you've got to really work with the partners and help them understand some of what's happening. But I think that framing this all up and, this emphasis on getting back to that reward system where the opening up and talking and being able to turn to one another is part of the solution. It literally is part of the solution. And so, for example, just to use a heterosexual example for a second. So, and a slightly stereotyped example. I don't know why I would need to do that. Why should I do that? But
why?
What comes to mind. So let's say she was sexually abused, and and she's beginning to deal with that and has some involuntary responses to sexuality. This is a very common thing. And he can get mad because his needs are not being met, because she has lowered, her desires dropped as she's begun to do the work. So when you're talking about how do you deal with this in a relationship, it would be really bringing him on board that, and also helping him see that he probably has relational needs that aren't being met as well. And so by him being able to move out of the sexuality and begin to redo some of those early things where that she finds comfort in going to him rather than just threat. You see what I'm saying? It's really reorienting the whole thing. And the other side of that relationship is going to be so much more strong and so much more stable and frankly, you'll have a lot more sex. If anybody's listening and you're the partner, we're just using this particular example, but it is very wise of you. Like, the fast way through this is the slow way. Mm-hmm. And so if, for just to continue that example, if the partner that wasn't abused can really take the position of protector rather than perpetrator, right? Really reorient it. And like, so even if things are getting hot, you're the one saying, well, hang on a second, let's check in with you. How are you feeling? Like, are you sure? You see what I'm saying? They're going a little behind and letting the person that has been intruded upon, abused, violated lead. Then I'm telling you, you make this person feel safe, they're going to be in your lap. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Literally, figuratively. So
because it moves the nervous system, and that's what has to come. And so often in sexuality, we have a lot of anger and shame, which actually, what does it do to our nervous system? It makes us feel unsafe.
Right. Not very sexy.
Not very sexy. Yeah.
I like that you keep going back to the nervous system. It's just important. So it's the nervous system, but in relationship. And we want to try to get back that reward of turning to each other and the effectiveness. Because also you can be so wound up that I might tell you about it and tell you about it and tell you about it and never feel better. Well, that has to do with the other side of the spectrum that we talk about quite a bit, but the preoccupied, where that we're hyper aroused and we're kind of angry and blaming and grabbing and trying to, again, it's still, we're not judging that. I can be right on the ceiling with anybody else. But when we're up there, we can't be reached and we're not going to, we can't be soothed.
Right.
So, it's like the old help rejecting complainer or something, and it's not our fault. It's like a drowning person grabbing on. We're not being a jerk or something. But if we can, exactly what Anne's saying is, if we can begin to regulate ourselves a little bit, then we have room to oh, you're listening to me. For the uptake that is actually part of the important part of it. So that's why I keep talking about getting that reward system going again, where it actually feels good and it works to do the interpersonal connection.
To add to that, one of the things that can be really tough in doing this, because that's what we would probably want to do in our relationships as much as possible, but sometimes what makes it hard is that when we're having a trauma response, our entire face and body responds that way. Right? So if, let's say I'm having a fight with my partner and it's triggering something in me that is more about my complex trauma, that is creating this hyperarousal, this fear, and maybe this look of pain, I might look to my partner as if they just abused me.
Right.
And so what is so hard in a partnership is you're having what seems to be a fight about something minor, but because that person's come at me, if I have complex trauma, in this really angry, intense face, and that triggers me, then I respond, and this person thinks they're very justified in being angry at me, right? But I respond in this hyper intensive, very upset and traumatized look on my face. What often I see in couples is that in and of itself becomes traumatizing to both, because the person that's come at me with a reasonable argument, right, sees that I'm having this trauma response. It actually can elicit more anger, more rejection, more pull away.
Or make them feel like they're a monster, like that they're bad or they've done something.
Yeah. So one of the things to your question is to recall that if you see this trauma response, especially if you're in a relationship with somebody who has complex trauma, that you have to be able to, I give it the 12-minute rule for couples. When you start to see that expression on each other's face, it is not the time to be dealing with it. And the 12-minute.
Well, what about that? Let me explain. Well, no, that's not what I meant.
Yes.
No, you need to listen. Hold on, let me finish.
That's exactly. It's so understandable, because what we really believe is you wouldn't be that traumatized if you could understand, right? But the important part is, in trauma, we are no longer in our prefrontal cortex. We're in our protective state. There's nothing logical you could tell me. So the more she says, let me explain. And she's looking at me now angrily because I'm being ridiculously overreactive.
So let's play that out though in the positive way, right? So let's say she's triggered. First, I feel misunderstood because I'm like, I didn't do that, But if this is what we're advocating for people to do, if I've learned her and I'm like, oh, she heard blah, 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 or this is that thing that she did, whatever. then I could use my face and my tone of voice and my pacing to be signaling to her safety, right? Rather than like urgency or whatever, whether it be touch or whether it be, again, you can feel, it's not the word, it's not going to be content up here. It's her neuroception of safety. So I want to have emoticons all around my head that are just like, I'm safe here, you know what I mean? Which will then help regulate her nervous system down. So then she can actually hear, and then I can make my point. But
we can't always jump into that. There's my 12-minute rule.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can do that, but often you have to calm your nervous systems down to be able to approach with that soft approach.
Yeah, that's a good co-regulation example.
Yeah. Oh my God. I love the entire explanation of that entire question was just awesome. I'm glad you brought in the sexuality, because so many people watching right now have had sexual abuse in some way, shape, or form. And that's obviously so influential on, romantic partnerships and 12-minute rules and just all of that. That was great. So I'd love it since we're running a little low on time, for you to share about a gift you have for everybody. And then we'll talk about the amygdala course that Anne mentioned a little bit ago. So what is this gift?
So the gift is we're changing websites. So I don't know exactly when this airs what it will be, but basically you're going to look for the attachment bundle, and the new website is going to be called the Attachment Starter Pack. We're going to update it. And it's totally free. You just go get it. And again, I think there'll be a link below for that if I'm catching that right.
Yeah.
And basically it's got, we've kind of curated a few of the best podcasts, some worksheets again, some videos of us talking about this more. This is just about like attachment 101. So if you want to, like, when we're saying deal with attachment stuff, just like this will give you hours of stuff to do, believe me. So there's a lot of free information in there that'll kind of bring you up to speed about like, what is this adult attachment world? So that's the free gift.
Gotcha. Awesome. Yeah. And again, everybody, there's a button below for the free gift, and I highly recommend it. Every time I talk to you, I get new insights into the world of attachment, which I know is a big part of what you do. And so I highly recommend you do that, because there's visual representations and stuff that you can get a better understanding. Okay. So it's not me, it's my amygdala. Is that how you say it?
That's it. That is a course that Sue and I developed because you can tell we get excited about this information, and it so directly impacts us both individually as well as all of our relationships. So we did a very deep dive. It's actually 4 hours. 4 hours of content where we do a lot of visuals, et cetera, to take this complex information and make it very usable, hopefully really interesting, very applicable to all of us in the real world, about how it impacts our relationships and how you can understand how attachment impacts your body and your relationships.
Yeah, it'll answer questions like why insight alone is not enough. Mm-hmm. It will help you create a path for what to do, like very specifically. We even follow a case through development, all the way into their therapy office, and even through the therapy, right? So it ends well. But it's a fake case, obviously, but we follow as a way of explaining. So I think it's very, it's complex, but that's our whole thing, is we want to make the science understandable.
Yeah. And one of the things related to our topic today that I wanted to jump in on is that we've talked a lot about disorganized attachment, and in this course, we really specifically talk about it. And for some individuals, we can have, because of our history, grow up with just generally a disorganized way of being there in the world related to trauma. And to get in there and understand it and what you can do about it can be so, I think, de-shaming and motivating and give you agency. And just having that agency is probably one of the most important things. But you could also have pockets of disorganization due to trauma. And we talk a lot about that in detail, because I think that understanding can really, as well as some really concrete suggestions about how to deal with it.
Got it. Awesome. So, quick question. We have a lot of, like, the majority of the people watching right now are people who have suffered some kind of trauma, not necessarily professionals in the world of therapy, but we also do have a large amount of people that are therapists, that are, counselors, all those kinds of things. So is this something that is for one or the other, or both, or what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, we put a lot of thought into this, actually. It's for both. So if you're a professional, you're good to go. You're going to get stuff, even if you already know stuff about it, for sure. Like, we think of it as an advanced course, and there are CEs offered, which is really cool if you're a professional, so that you'll get credit for even taking the course. But if you're coming at it from a life experience perspective, like, as long as you, like, if you're a little bit of a geek, if you're a little bit of a nerd and you really want to know this stuff, then we have your back. Like, I think that there's a lot of people who have taken it. I won't say most, but a ton of people have taken it that just either are working on themselves or whatever it is, lifelong learners, people just interested, and definitely people who have trauma history and things like that. I think it's good for, we had in mind both populations, for sure.
And even though it says advanced, you don't have to have any knowledge of attachment to jump in, because we talk about it from the very beginning all the way through, from the bundle, the free bundle, and then we sort of everything builds on one another.
Yeah. Awesome. Excellent. And I like that you threw in, the nerds and geeks, because, I consider myself one of those, and, it's
we call some of our listeners, neuro nerds.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's so fascinating. I mean, like, I love neuroscience. I think it's so amazing to just understand why we as humans, right, interact, behave, react, whatever the ways that we do, based on what's going on up there.
It's changing so rapidly. And that's one of the things, again, that if even if you already know some about it, it's like keeping up is hard. And then the other thing that Anna and I uniquely did was really took the research that's more dry and like quadrants and things like that, and we turned it into colors and spectrums, and like where you can, by the time that you get to that, you'll be able to find yourself on the spectrum, and you'll be able to see how that relates to your partner who's over here, or your child who's over there. You know what I mean? And we really get those different perspectives interacting.
And how they relate to one another and can influence one another.
Yeah, so we make it, I don't think it's overly simplified, but we do make it it's very understandable and usable, because that's our whole point, is we want the science to get out to the world. And it's not fair to leave it in a therapist's mind, or in some lab somewhere, or in some dense book that nobody's gonna, you know what I mean?
Right.
So that's, we consider ourselves the bridge from that textbook or what have you into real world.
I love it. So would you actually share a little bit about, I'd have one of your worksheets that's part of your course that is beautifully colorful and kind of explains a little bit of what we've been talking about. Can you do like a brief explanation of that, and I'll pull it up here so people can see what we're talking about. Okay. All right. So what is the modern attachment regulation spectrum?
There we go.
There we go. So what you see here
Isn't that pretty?
It is.
It's pretty. It may look overwhelming and with lots of pieces of information, so you will have this completely broken apart in the course. But what we try to do is help individuals understand, if you see those boxes, those are maps, and what those are is that's kind of our internal working model that we grew up with and that we have. That's kind of our baseline. And the continuum is how we move and how we become dysregulated and regulated based on what happens in our everyday life.
That's right. And then, like, if you'll see the little sunglasses, this is something we threw in. Mm-hmm. So when you're in your grounded state, where you are integrating both your mind and your body, and we could call this secure attachment, or even a secure state, then you're seeing the world clearly. That's the green. That's right. And then you notice the glasses darken as they go out to the edges. It's because that we begin to, it changes our perception. So when we're in a really dysregulated state, like we hear like the red going over the red, the dysregulation, we're hearing Jaws music. And when you hear Jaws music, it changes how you see things. A twig becomes something scary, or a snapping twig, and the same on the other side, that like, when we shut down, it really changes our perception of the world, and we change what we're putting out to the world and what we're receiving from the world.
Mm.
So there's a lot more to it. At the bottom is the tie-dye. That's the petal that we're representing as a disorganized attachment. So there's not an organized strategy, but it's beautiful. And one of the things that's really important is anybody, no matter who you're working with, whether it's us or anybody else, don't let anybody pathologize any of this stuff. We are, as you said earlier, Andy, vibrant, beautiful human beings, surviving and thriving in the best that we know how. And that's the framework that we come from. That's why we made it colorful and beautiful. But we are trying to represent that there's not an organized internal way of managing, either at times when, as Ann said, when we fall into a pocket, or sometimes if the abuse has been bad enough, it's kind of more it's more where we live in a little bit of a disorganized state. And so the goal is to organize yourself enough to be able to pop up onto the spectrum and be able to see your different places. So obviously there's a lot to it. By the time you get to this in the course, this will make a lot more sense.
I love this. Yeah. I love just like, it's so nice to see the visual and the glasses. I love that. That really helps. What were you going to say, Ann?
Well, and the reason that you see the two people, those are actually two people on the top, is to show the relationship between us and how our nervous systems respond to each other. And I think this is the most important part that we cover in the course. Go ahead, you have to.
No problem.
So that's one of the most important parts in the course, I believe, is that to see how we were talking about that earlier, how our nervous systems respond to one another. We always seem to see that we think we have those clear glasses and the other people have the dark ones, right? And so what happens is that as one, the arrow going up is where we get hyper aroused, and the blue arrow going down shows when we go down and we kind of dismiss and detach. And oftentimes we see when one person goes up, the other goes down, and vice versa. And to understand that really can bring clarity to a lot of your interactions.
I love it. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you going through this. This just it really solidifies things a lot more for me. And I'm guessing other people too, just to, kind of get a picture in their mind of what's going on. So I love that. Awesome. So again, everyone, there's 2 buttons below. So leading over to the gift as well as the course. I highly, highly recommend these 2 fabulous ladies. We've clearly asked them back to multiple Avaya events for a reason. And so if you're inspired to work further, I recommend you grab that course. So any last insights? Anything else you guys want to talk about before we wrap up?
No, I think that we covered a lot, and I'm sure people are super busy, and thank you for bringing this kind of work to the world. I think it's awesome what you guys do.
Yeah, thank you. Well, our pleasure, and right back at you. And thanks for saying yes again.
Oh no, I do have one thing. I'm so sorry. Yeah. Okay, so before we close, we all have to acknowledge when we're recording this. And we brought this up before, but we're recording this in May, in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis.
That's why I need a haircut.
You might notice our hair. And so I think we have to tip our hat to that, because one of the things that's so important about that is that we are all, whether you come from a secure base from your childhood or more of an insecure as we're talking about it, we are all under chronic stress right now. And we are all being impacted from a neurological level, emotional level, and our relationships are seriously being impacted, some for the very positive, some really rough. Yeah. And one of the things I just want to say is that to really recognize that our nervous systems are heightened, and that individuals with more complex trauma might actually be experiencing more intense symptoms or experiences. And just to really be aware that even that our bodies need, that we're not getting a break, right? We're not getting a break from the news. And one of the things that impacts, we talked about that resiliency is about something that's predictable and controllable. And when we have stress that's predictable and controllable, we can acclimate. Well, at this point, much of this is not predictable or controllable. So I just want to do a shout out to help people really have empathy for what you might be experiencing in your body.
Especially if you're isolated. So this is just anybody that's listening alone and not wanting to be alone, or even with people but feeling really alone. Just shout out to you. It's a hello. It's a friendly wave.
Well, and one of the podcasts that we just did, and I'm going to go ahead and talk about it related to this, is the importance that we can use, and we didn't get a chance to talk about it. There's so much to cover, but the importance of using imagery to try to develop security in your body. And the last podcast we did was about, if individuals are alone, the ability to use some imagery to kind of warm up your system, which is part of our goal, to warm up our system and to experience connection. Both of those are really important. So just a thought, you might want to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we have a link below to your podcast also. So if people watching right now aren't familiar, you can head on over there and check that out. And thank you for mentioning that, because we are in a very unusual time right now. And absolutely, from what I've gathered and talking to a lot of people for this event, it is absolutely affecting people in so many different ways. Again, like you said, whether you're alone and want to be with people, or maybe you're with people and you feel alone, or you're with people and you wish you were alone, because there's that too, right? There's so many different things going on. So very important to remember that. So thank you so much. This was amazing as usual. I appreciate it. And thank you everyone for showing up for yourself. We love you. We wouldn't be here without you doing this. And we're so glad that you're here on this journey of healing, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care.